All right, let's start today's episode by talking about the NFL salary cap. The NFL League Office announced last week that they were going to be increasing the salary cap for 2024 to $255.4 million per club. Now, the reason why this is such a big deal is because most cap experts, teams, fans, and players expect the cap to increase somewhere between $10 million to maybe $15 million annually. But we're seeing an unprecedented $30 million increase for 2024. This is great news. It's primarily driven by the NFL recently announcing $110 billion of media rights packages, and it means that players and agents are going to be making more money than ever before. But the reason I want to talk about this today is because the salary cap is part of the reason why the NFL's business model is better than any other league in professional sports today. Many people that follow the NFL for multiple decades now know that the salary cap is actually relatively new. It was implemented in 1994, and before that, the NFL operated on what's known as a reserve system. This was adopted from Major League Baseball, and essentially it meant that a player could stay with a team his entire career, because when his contract expired, he could only negotiate with the team he was currently on. The only way to switch teams, because there was no free agency, was to either A, retire, B, get traded, or C, have your contract traded to another team. This system, based on supply and demand, artificially suppressed NFL salaries for decades. And it was a major problem. There was a bunch of NFL players that sued the NFL, and it led to several lockouts over the years. So in 1994, the NFLPA and the NFL agreed in the collective bargaining agreement to establish free agency. But as the saying goes, there is no free lunch. So in return for establishing free agency with the NFL Players Association, NFL owners got a salary cap. Now, you guys know what a salary cap is. I don't need to explain it to you, but there are different variations, and it primarily does two things. One, it helps control cost, and two, it creates parity amongst different leagues and teams. And there are a variation of different salary caps used in professional sports today. MLB has a different one than the NBA, and the NBA has a different one than the NFL, and the NFL has a different one than MLS. But they all have a few things in common. There's soft caps, there's hard caps, there's luxury taxes, and there's salary floors. But most importantly, no one benefits from this more than the owners themselves. Let's talk about the NFL, for instance. The NFL primarily makes money in two ways. There's national revenue and there's local revenue. National revenue is anything that's done at the league office. So it's the selling of media rights, it's league-wide sponsorships, it's merchandise that's sold at the league level, etc. And then local revenue is things that are done at the local revenue. It's ticket sales, it's concessions, it's parking, it's sponsorships for the stadium, including naming rights and things like that. National revenue is typically bigger than local revenue, depending on the size of the club that you own or you participate in or that you're a fan of. But let's use real numbers here, because I want to explain to you guys how important the salary cap is to the overall NFL's business model. So this year, the salary cap is set at $255.4 million. That means that's how much NFL teams, outside of other player compensation like health benefits and stuff like that, are going to be setting on their active roster. But on a national revenue basis, each team will get a check at the end of the year for over $400 million. That's, again, media rights, sponsorships, and things like that. So the important part about this is that a salary cap helps set a profitability floor. You know how much money that you're going to be making on an annual basis because you can map out your expenses, right? You're able to forecast on a model perspective better than other leagues are, because if you go to the English Premier League, you don't know how much money you're going to be spending next year or 5 years from now on player salaries. In the NFL, you know of that because of the salary cap. And it also means that everything from a local revenue perspective is a cherry on top. Now, don't get me wrong. There are expenses. Some teams are renting multiple planes to travel to their 8 or 9 away games each year. Coaching salaries have reached $15 to $20 million on the higher end. And there are numerous other expenses that go on throughout the year. Teams are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on expenses every single year. But the important part about this is that it makes teams profitable, because when you add the national revenue with the local revenue and you set the floor on player expenses as part of the CBA, teams are raking in hundreds of millions of dollars in operating profit. I'll give you guys an example. Sportico says in 2022, the Dallas Cowboys led the NFL with $460 million in operating profit, in EBITDA that year. And the reason they're able to do that is because not only are they receiving the same national revenue check that every NFL team is getting, but they're also making more money than everyone else on the local revenue side. I mean, Jerry Jones is famous for this. He sells better sponsorships. He has a ton of money tied up in the real estate down there, and he makes a tremendous amount of money on the local revenue side. But there's a number of other teams that are making good money too. The New England Patriots were number 2 with $265 million in EBITDA last year. The New York Giants were number 3 at $215 million in EBITDA in 2022. And the average NFL team is bringing in $137 million in EBITDA every single year. And that number is only going to continue to get higher as national revenue continues to increase. And again, this is why I always talk about the NFL having the best business model in all of sports. I've talked to executives, team and league executives at virtually every other professional sports league in the United States, and all of them are envious and jealous of the NFL's model. And the reason for that is quite simple. Let's just look at the details here. On a broadcasting basis, the NFL sells all of its rights at a national level. So they don't have to deal with any regional sports networks, the RSNs, that a lot are going bankrupt and have been a financial mess over the last few years. They also signed agreements with a mix of broadcast, cable, and streaming companies. That gives them the perfect mix of reach, innovation, and monetization. That's amazing, and they've been able to do that better than every other league. We've seen that with their recent streaming exclusive-only games. They sold a game last year to Peacock for $110 million, and this upcoming season, they're selling one to Amazon for $150 million. They slice and dice their media rights better than everyone else. And then when you add in the salary cap, the fact that it rises in parallel with revenue growth is another amazing tactic for NFL owners to be able to forecast their growth over the coming years. We obviously know that they're growing internationally. They're going to be playing 5 games in a number of different countries this coming season, building that global audience year over year over year. And while it's not as lucrative as the US audience from a pure GDP perspective, it still helps the overall growth of the product to become an international audience. And I don't even need to get started on online sports betting. Online sports betting has obviously raised the bar when it comes to sponsorship revenue, but I also think that people don't talk about it enough in the context of viewership numbers. We've seen viewership numbers skyrocket across virtually all major professional sports leagues outside of the NBA over the last few years. Now, part of this is because Nielsen changed the way that they record the numbers and broadcast the numbers. But the other part of this is I think more people are watching the games because more people are betting on the games and they want to watch their teams and the players they have prop bets on perform in those games. I have a quote here from Roger Goodell that I think gives good insight into how he's thinking about growth of the NFL over the next several years. The NFL commissioner says, "I am convinced that this game is going to be a global sport. We could have sold out over 2 games in Germany last year. There were 4.5 million tickets in demand. They sold out in minutes. And it's literally the same with the UK. I think you're going to see a very global NFL, not necessarily with franchises, but maybe like we have one playing games on a global basis. And I see that happening in the next 5 to 10 years. So yes, a $30 million increase in the salary cap is great for players and it's great for agents. It means that teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, who just won the Super Bowl, are going to have more money to re-sign free agents and compete again next year. And the running joke is that it helps every team because now they're going to be able to go out and sign free agents for more money than they had before. But at the end of the day, the important thing to remember is that NFL owners are more than happy to see the salary cap increase because it means that national revenue checks and local revenue checks are coming in more and more every single year. It's important to remember that the NFL is the biggest sports league in America by far and away. Nothing else comes close. And these numbers are only going to get bigger over time.